So you coach and advise startups on topics such as UX and product management. One thing I'm hearing and experiencing with startups makes me feel that startups and UX research are almost always not going hand in hand. The basic notion of startup founders, and I might be wrong here, is that we know what people need. On the other hand, the basic notion of UX researchers is we have no idea what people need. Let's find out. What are your thoughts on this?
Very interesting and timely question. There's a lot of discussion happening right now around the question of are founders arrogant people who believe that they know everything that customers need, or are they in the business of exploration? And I think that there is a change happening right now. In the past, I've been working exclusively with early stage companies and venture capitalists and high growth companies. I've been working with them pretty exclusively since leaving Adaptive Path 4 years ago, I believe. And I found that there has been an expectation that founders are supposed to know what they're doing and supposed to know what customers need, and that they're supposed to have this grand vision and that they're going to drive this big vision out into the world. There's also now a new movement called the Lean Startup Movement that really taps into a much deeper truth, which is that startup founders aren't those people. They're not these arrogant, I know better than everybody else kinds of folks. And that really, and I always found that to be true anyway. I always found that once you scratch the surface and once you get past the pitch deck, they don't know what they're doing. They're trying a lot of stuff. They have some ideas, they think they're on the right track, but they really don't have that bravado. That's all it is. It's really bravado. And yeah, they have huge egos, but their ego doesn't say, I know exactly what's best for the user, and if the user says X and I say Y, then Y is going to be the accurate way. That's not really how it works. That's a false impression that they give because they've been expected to. Rather, what I'm finding is that users have no idea how to satisfy customers, and that all of the things around the lean startup and customer development movement are giving them a framework and a structure for exploring their hypotheses, for saying, I believe that probably people are like this, and I'm going to do the smallest possible experiment in order to understand whether that's true or not. And once I understand whether that's true or not, I'm going to invest heavily in the new learning. And that is kind of this new model that falls under the lean startup customer development umbrella.
When should a startup company initiate user research, in your opinion?
Before they're a startup, right? The concept of customer development begins as soon as you think you might want to quit your day job. You have an idea, so take the idea and sit at a coffee shop and ask questions of people who might be the people who would receive that idea. And there's a lot that can be learned about how to ask good questions so that you get real validation instead of false positives or false negatives. But it really does start that easily. There's a group called Lean Startup Machine that walks people through this experience over the course of a weekend. And it's magnificent to see, and I have been volunteering my time as a mentor in those weekends, and it's great to see people start with an idea on Friday night and validate that idea on Saturday, create their prototype on Sunday, and present it in a sort of contest environment with some prizes given and that sort of thing at the end of Sunday, and it can be done efficiently, and that sort of lean startup machine weekend is evidence that it can be done in a time-efficient manner. But the very, very, very first thing you should do when you have an idea is get some customer input.
All right. I personally relocated to the U.S. about a little over 3 years ago from Israel. Israel is known for being a startup nation with 4,000 startups, active startups, second only to Silicon Valley. These Israeli startups are very strong on the technology side, but more often than not, they're less so on the design side. What do you often suggest to startups who want to be better in design?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I had numerous conversations with certain people in Israel who want to bring some lean user experience thinking over to Israel. The very first thing that I would suggest is to attempt to read 4 Steps to the Epiphany and then not finish it, because nobody actually does. But then pick up the Vlaskovitz book, Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development. I say this because it provides you with a framework that will be very useful. And for entrepreneurs, the most important thing is that we can identify what is the next thing that needs to be done. At the end of any day, the entrepreneurs that I work with want to know, what are the 10 points I'm going to put in Pivotal Tracker on Monday that we're going to build? Right? It ends up being very, very tactical, even at the same time that you're thinking of these very strategic things like, what's the customer segmentation that's going to mean the most and represent real dollars? Like, you're figuring an entrepreneurial CEO needs to have a zoom lens. I'm going to go wide, but then I'm going to go really narrow. I'm going to go wide, and then I'm going to go narrow. And what those 2 books do, they're both self-published in the last couple of years, and they both provide a little bit of a roadmap for what you need to do first, second, third. The first thing you have to do is understand who you're addressing. I like to manifest that as a persona. The second thing you have to do is understand their needs and goals. None of that, all of that, above the dotted line, all of that is about a human being and their needs. Separately, you have a separate kind of inquiry around the business aspects. That's the technology and the business opportunities it affords. And the intersection of those 2 things is really the value prop that you can take to market. And in order to present a good value prop to an investor or to a potential co-founder, partner, whatever, you need to really know that the business potential bears out and the customer needs bear out. So the intersection between a person who might buy your product and their needs and goals with your business vision, that's the value prop. So that's the very first big milestone. And if you can get to that milestone in a validated way, where you've actually gone out and done qualitative and quantitative research to prove it, that's the magic. Once you have that, then all other user experience stuff comes next. What I find in technology-driven startups is that we start from that side business point of view. We don't remember to start here and go down. And so what you're doing is you're going down a path that has businessy validation, but it doesn't have the consumer value prop going. And I'm talking about consumer because it's more straightforward, but B2B has a lot of the same criteria, because ultimately, while you have a more complex selling environment, you're still making a product to meet the needs of a person. And that person is the user buyer, but the person the other person in the sale is the financial buyer, and you may have a detail buyer, like an IT person often is the detail buyer who can kill the deal on a technicality, that kind of thing. But each of those people has something that they need and some goals that they have that can intersect with your product. And you won't have a successful business unless you find out what those needs are and intersect them with your product vision. I'm going to sneeze just a second.
Several Israeli startup founders, and this is relevant for every startup founder that is located outside of the US. So I talked to them and they told me that they acknowledge the importance of and the value of research. So they know what usability testing can give them. They know what field research can give them. But in the same time, they claim that their users are located in the U.S. and that it's hard for them to conduct research from afar. What are some research methods and high return on investment with high return on investment methods you can recommend to such startup founders?
There are a lot of new ways to do research, and I'd like to differentiate. There are two kinds of research that I advocate. One I call generative research, and the other is about testing. Both of them have qualitative and quantitative aspects to them. The first is really more predominantly qualitative, and it's about, do this, open your brain and pour in a bunch of new information, and then that changes how you think about your product. That's all about creating new ideas. The typical way that kind of research is done is long conversations, long interviews. So you have a half-hour interview, and it's not that you have a questionnaire and you want people to fill out the question. You're having a conversation and you want to get them to tell you stories. All of this is about developing some empathy and a real clear understanding of what those people have as goals and needs. That's generative user research, and the generative refers to it generates new insights for you and it generates new ideas for you. For that kind of research, the tools that are really useful, particularly remote tools, are just basic things like doing a Skype call, and then recruiting becomes the difficult thing. The difficulty with a multi-time zone is about getting synchronous, right, research. And for that generative research, which is so important, the good news is that you only have to do a few of these. 5 will get you tons of data, and that tons of data will be useful to you for a year or more, because people don't tend to change that quickly. So this generative user research, you do a small number of interviews, each interview for some chunk of time, half hour, 30 minutes, and everything in that interview is probably going to be useful. So you save that whole file, and that becomes a touchstone that you go back to. And the remote tools that we're using right now are the ones that allow us to have face-to-face collaboration across great distances, but it's all synchronous. It's a conversation between two people. The second kind, the stuff that I would call testing, you have both quantitative and qualitative. On the qualitative side, usability testing, fine. On the quantitative side, you have some metrics and A/B testing and that sort of thing. On this side, there is a ton of extra new asynchronous tools, things like 5-minute test and usertesting.com, and probably 20 different tools that didn't exist 2 years ago are now available and are incredibly useful. So research doesn't have to be, research can be talking to people and having a conversation. Research can be observing users interacting with something that you have put on the web. Research can be actual product analytics, metrics, Google Analytics kinds of metrics. So you have 3 different kinds of ways that you can start to answer some of your questions. And I'm still understanding kind of all of the different ways of evaluating the goodness of a thing that I've put out there, the success of a thing that's put out there. So this is burgeoning, this whole set of mostly quantitative but also some qualitative testing methods. The stuff that's still pretty sort of the same as it ever was is the pre-design generative qualitative research. The one thing that is not in that kind of landscape is surveying, and surveying is useful, but it's very, very easy to do surveys wrong. And by wrong, I mean they just don't get you the kinds of insights that are actionable that you can believe in. So it's, I think, harder to do a good survey. Now that said, I have done my own surveys for my own business and found them to be tremendously helpful but I had to be very careful about how I structured the questions and what the order of questions was and that sort of thing to make sure that I could believe in the results.
Last question. I got a call from a friend who told me that he has founded a startup last week, and he told me he wants to hire a UX person. He's probably the third person in the company. When do you think startup founders or startups should hire their first UX person, if at all?
So the question is, when should a startup hire the first UX person, or should they hire a UX person? And the answer is, it depends.
Of course.
Of course. I think that strategically, UX is more important than it's ever been before. And the right UX person can be a fantastic asset to an early stage company. Some of the things that really hinder an early stage company are the ability to execute. Actually, to have someone to slice graphics and do the production and make it not look amateurish. This can hold a company back tremendously. I really regret not investing in that in my previous company because I couldn't do it myself, and I know myself now well enough to know that I needed to be able to experiment with look and feel a lot, frequently, and we didn't have an ability to do that, and it tied my hands. Also, I am a plumber. I'm an interaction designer. I make things that you don't ever notice. Like if I'm doing my job well, you'll just never notice, which is very similar to plumbing. Like you flush the toilet flushes, you just don't think about it, right? It's that sort of thing. So I knew that I could do certain kinds of interaction design, but I couldn't execute, at least not well. So there's that aspect to hiring. User experience, though, is a much larger stack. And if you have a sort of journeyman level, someone who's really been in the field, really doing professional level work, able to think about how to translate from what a user's life is like into what that turns into in a product vision and turn that into actual screens, like that can be incredibly useful, particularly if they've maintained their ability to that larger stack of user experience skill is very helpful if the person has maintained their ability to do the work at every level. Often as you get more senior, you kind of lose the tactical skills, but if you have someone who still is really conversant at all levels, it's magic and can be incredibly helpful from day one. The hardest part of a lean startup in particular is noticing when you're making hypotheses about human behavior and forming insightful questions that can then be validated either through a prototype or through some other means. Will people, here's an example. The ocarina was an early application on the iPhone. You take your iPhone and you blow into the microphone, and then you press on certain buttons, and it makes the sound of an ocarina. It's a flute, basically. And what's amazing is that you can then press this world button, and this image of a globe comes up, and it turns, and you can watch the spiral and listen to people playing the ocarina anywhere in the world, in real time. And that was actually an experiment that was leading to a completely other product. Not a game, not an ocarina, nothing to do with ocarina, but what they wanted to test was, will people blow into their phone? Is that a behavior they'll do? And will they share a creation with other people that they don't know in real time? So they were doing a gesture experiment and a social experiment that allowed them to build other products that were more in line with their keeping. So someone was insightful enough to say, wait guys, we are actually asking users to do A, B, and C, and we have no idea if these are behaviors that people will ever do. Someone was smart enough to see that as a need. They noticed the hypothesis and noticing the hypothesis and then formulating the right test for that hypothesis, that is, I think, super core product work. And I don't care whether it's a user experience person or a business person or a technologist that comes up with that insight. I happen to believe that a user experience thinker is going to be more tuned in to that, and that the balanced team of user experience and development and business together are going to come up with those profound questions. So the long answer to the short question, when should you hire a user experience person? And the answer is as soon as you find the one who's going to round out that core product team. The product team is one team. There's no developer team. There's no product management team. There's one product team, and it includes the role, not necessarily 3 people, but the roles of development, business, user experience. That's
All right.
the answer.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. That was easy.
That was